Hey guys, it's Spirits from the Self-Help Photographer. It's Tuesday and I'm doing Sharpness Part 2, which is what I promised you guys last week. And I'm actually going to do this in 3 parts because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to sharpness. Today we're talking about how your lens can impact your sharpness. In the last sharpness video, we talked about calculating depth of field. And in that video, I mentioned that it's not a good idea to shoot at your smallest apertures like f/22 and f/32, that it negatively impacts the sharpness of your photos. This is because of something that's called diffraction. Diffraction is what happens when a wave hits an obstacle. In photography, it's what happens when a light wave that's entering the lens of the camera passes through the aperture because the edges of the aperture create an obstacle. And that obstacle changes the properties of that light wave. Normally, when a light wave travels from an origin point to a destination point without passing through any obstacles, it resolves itself as a mirror image. In fact, a mirror is a perfect example. If you're looking in the mirror, the light is reflecting off of your face, and that is an origin point. And as it travels to the mirror, there are no obstacles in between. It just goes to the mirror. And it resolves itself, or it replicates itself as an exact replica. Now, if you were to look at these origin points and destination points under magnification, it would look like this. This is an illustration, of course, but this is showing you an identical origin point and an identical destination point. There is no mutation. Now, when you have light reflecting off of a subject and passing into your lens and through the aperture of your camera, the light waves are dispersed through this diffraction phenomena. And when they're dispersed, the properties of the light wave change, and the change in property causes the light waves to interfere with each other. This interference is a result of the diffraction, and the interference causes the destination point to replicate or resolve itself differently from the origin point. So if we look at the origin point and the destination point from a subject into a camera, under magnification, it looks like this. And you can see you have the origin point, which looks normal, but this pattern, which is called an airy pattern, is the result of the diffraction and the interference by the changes in the wave. The important part of this pattern that we're looking at is the center, and the center of that pattern is called an airy disk. The airy disk is important because the size of that airy disk impacts the sharpness of your photo. See, the airy disk is the best replication of that point of light that you're going to get when it passes through the aperture of the lens. And in general, you want the size of the airy disk to correspond to the size of the pixels on your camera sensor. Keeping the airy disk this size allows for the accurate recording of details in your photograph. If an airy disk becomes too large, it bleeds over into other pixels on the image. And those bleeding pixels run into each other. They all smoosh together, which leaves you with this muddy mess that has no detail and no sharpness to it. So if you have 2 pixels side by side with appropriate airy disks, it's going to look like this. And you can see the outer edges of those airy patterns overlap. But the outer edges of those airy patterns don't impact the image or the sharpness. They're effectively not recorded. However, the airy disk is. And here you can see that when they're resolved at a proper size relative to the pixel, you can distinctly see each individual airy disk. This is going to translate into distinct and sharp details in your photograph. If the airy disks get too big, it's going to look like this. And you can see that the disks are now indistinguishable from each other. And when this happens, you're going to get poor sharpness and poor details recorded in your image. The good news is that you can control the size of the airy disk with the aperture of your lens. And even though diffraction occurs at every aperture, whether you're wide open or closed all the way down, the airy disks only start to become a problem at smaller apertures. Now, you can test each one of your lenses to figure out exactly where diffraction starts to occur on your lens, or you can use the general rule of thumb out there. And the rule of thumb is a rule of thumb because it's pretty accurate and it's pretty consistent across all lenses. I use the rule of thumb because I'm not really inclined to take the time to test all of my lenses, and I also think we've gotten a little bit obsessed about sharpness in our new digital photography world. So let me explain how the rule of thumb works, and then I will explain why I think we're a little over-obsessed with sharpness. The rule of thumb for avoiding diffraction and maintaining good sharpness is to not use the last 2 apertures on the lens. So if you have a lens that has a maximum aperture of f32, you would not close down further than f16. If your maximum aperture is f22, then you wouldn't close your aperture down past f11. It's that simple, because when the aperture is too small, the airy discs become too big. Now you might be wondering, well, what am I supposed to do if I need depth of field? And the truth is, if you use f22 or f32, the gains you get in depth of field are negated by the sharpness you lose due to the large airy discs. That doesn't mean you should never use f22 or f32. If you need that depth of field and you're happy with the sharpness quality, go ahead, shoot at that aperture, just so long as you know the impact that this is going to have on the sharpness. And that takes us into why I think we're a little too obsessed with sharpness. Because we've got digital cameras, we've got computers, we've got software like Lightroom and Photoshop. And with these tools, it is extremely easy to inspect our images at maximum resolution, at 100%. And when we're looking at it at 100%, it is so easy to see all the flaws that are going to be in the image. It's so easy to see everything that's wrong. And when you look at that, because we're human, we get upset. And then we want to fix it, and we want to get a perfect, absolutely sharp, across the entire photograph image. And the truth is, that's practically impossible. It's impossible because of physics. It's impossible because of the limitations of our lenses, of our camera sensors, of us as humans and as photographers. So we have to manage our expectations. What we need to do is understand the limitations of our equipment and understand the limitations of sharpness in general. And we also have to take a step back, because when you're looking at a photograph, how do you look at that photo? Do you walk up to it and look at it from an inch away, or pull out a magnifying glass and inspect every inch of that photo to make sure every single detail is sharp? If you do, I would argue that you're not really getting the benefit of the photo. When I look at a photograph, I look at the photograph and I enjoy the photograph for the beautiful, moving piece of photography that it is. I don't get in close. I don't look at the details, because while the details are important and sharpness is important, how the image is presented impacts the sharpness and how important the sharpness is overall. For instance, if you don't print your images and you mostly just share them online, these images are being replicated at relatively small sizes. And when it's that small, the tiny, tiny details in the background that aren't sharp aren't even showing up in a meaningful enough way that they need to be sharp in this representation. And the same thing applies if you do print, but you only print small prints like 4x6s or 5x7s or even a 6x9. Because at that size, all of the details in the background, every single little itty bitty piece, that stuff is not large enough to need to be 100% absolutely perfectly sharp as you would see it under 100% magnification, because it's a 4x6 print. The details in the background aren't that meaningful. On the other hand, if you print big prints, say a 30-inch by 40-inch print, say a 4-foot by 6-foot print, of course, sharpness is of the utmost importance, because when you print big, when you reproduce it big, the details are important. The sharpness of those details are important, because now they're being represented at a size that is much more meaningful. Now, there are a couple of more things that I need to talk about in terms of your lenses. There's a lot of people who are out there who say if you shoot your lens wide open, it's going to go soft and it's not going to be sharp. This is a bit of a myth, okay? The problem isn't that your lens is soft wide open. The problem is that when you're wide open, you've got a very, very, very narrow band of depth of field. And if your focusing is not 100% accurate, or you use the old focus and then recompose mode, you're going to change the depth of field in a large enough way that the thing you want to be sharp isn't going to be sharp. So be aware that shooting wide open, while some people may tell you is going to produce a soft photo, the truth is it's going to produce a sharp photo. It's just going to be a very tiny area of the photo that is actually sharp. Another thing you need to consider is your zoom lenses. And on a zoom lens, you're inherently compromising certain qualities because you're gaining the ability to zoom. And what you compromise, generally speaking, is image quality at your widest zoom and at your narrowest zoom. So if you want ultimate sharpness out of your zoom lens for a photograph that's super important, what I'd recommend you do is shoot in the middle of your zoom range. For instance, on my 17 to 50 millimeter Tamron, if I want a super sharp photo, I'm going to shoot that at about 30, 32 millimeters. That's going to be in the middle of the lens. It's going to use the best part of the glass for that lens. This is why, generally speaking, prime lenses are always sharper, because they're designed to use the best quality glass for that very specific focal length. They don't have to deal with the range. All right, guys, I know that was a lot. I'm going to do Sharpness Part 3 next week, so stay tuned for that. If you have any questions, use all the links down in the description. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel. I've got big news for local photographers. Starting in July, I'm going to do a monthly photo walk. July 6th is going to be the very first photo walk, and I'm going to have details for the location and the time on my website and on my Facebook page. And this is also going to go out to my email list, so stay tuned for that. Whether or not you can join me for my photo walk, make sure you do the most important thing, which is to get out there and just take some damn photos. I will see you guys next Tuesday. I can't taste the airy disc. Can you?